Walk along the main shopping street of almost any large Western city today, and you'll quickly notice something that feels deeply wrong. The television screens glowing inside store windows announce that stock markets are hovering near record highs, unemployment remains fairly low, and GDP numbers are still technically moving upward. Yet when you turn your attention to the people passing by those same windows, an entirely different picture emerges. You can see the tension on their faces as they mentally tally the cost of a simple sandwich that now costs nearly twice as much as it did just a few years ago. You notice four lease signs spreading across storefronts like a slow-growing infestation. And beneath it all, there's a heavy, shared unease. A quiet understanding that no matter what politicians or central bankers claim, the ground beneath the economy is beginning to fracture. This disconnect, the mental whiplash between the polished official economy enjoyed by the wealthy and the day-to-day reality experienced by everyone else, is not a coincidence. It is the outward sign of a deeper structural breakdown that began almost 20 years ago and was intentionally kept out of sight. We are not simply living through another recession. We are reaching the conclusion of a very specific economic chapter. For roughly 15 years, the global economy has been kept alive on financial life support, flooded with artificial stimulation in the form of ultra-cheap debt and freshly created money. Now those support systems are failing, and the patient is slowly waking up to a diagnosis that can no longer be ignored. To understand why this moment is unfolding now, in 2025 and 2026, we need to look beyond headlines about wars or supply chain disruptions and focus on the most important price on earth, the price of money itself. For most of human history, borrowing money came with a real cost. If you wanted capital to build a factory or purchase a home, you paid an interest rate that reflected the risk involved. That interest rate functioned like a natural filter, a gravitational force that anchored the economy in reality. It ensured that only businesses capable of generating real profits could survive. When a company failed to earn enough to cover the interest on its loans, it collapsed. Its assets were then transferred to someone more capable, allowing the economy to adapt and improve. This process is what economists call the creative destruction of capitalism. But in 2008, after the global financial crisis, central banks around the world chose to dismantle this system. Terrified of triggering a deflationary depression, the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, and others slashed interest rates to zero, and in some cases pushed them even below zero. This marked the beginning of the zero interest rate policy, or ZIRP era. It was meant to be a temporary emergency response, a powerful painkiller to keep the patient alive through the night. Instead, it became a permanent way of life. For 15 years, money was essentially free. This distortion of economic reality inflated what became known as the everything bubble. With no return available from saving cash in the bank, trillions of dollars were pushed into increasingly risky assets. Real estate prices soared, not because homes suddenly became more valuable, but because borrowing to buy them was cheap. Stock markets drifted away from underlying corporate earnings. Cryptocurrencies with little or no real-world use swelled into trillion-dollar markets. But the most dangerous consequence was the rise of a new kind of business, the zombie company. A zombie company earns just enough to keep operating and cover interest payments on its debt, but not enough to ever repay the debt itself. Under normal economic conditions, such companies would disappear. But during the ZIRP era, they didn't need to. They could simply refinance. When a loan reached its due date, they would take out new debt at 1% interest to pay off the old obligation. These firms became the economic undead, draining labor, capital, and resources while contributing nothing to real growth. By 2024, estimates suggested that nearly 1 in 5 companies across the United States and Europe met this definition. They were financial time bombs, stable only as long as interest rates stayed near zero. Then came the inflation shock of the early 2000s. The enormous wave of money printing used to prop up the economy during the pandemic finally broke through. Prices for energy, food, and housing surged. Central banks, realizing they had lost control, were forced to act aggressively. Interest rates were raised at the fastest pace seen in 40 years. That was the moment the music stopped. The era of free money ended almost overnight, but the mountain of debt accumulated during those years did not disappear. Now the economy is confronting the maturity wall. Trillions of dollars in corporate and commercial real estate debt, originally taken out when interest rates were close to zero, are coming due in 2025 and 2026. These loans must be refinanced. But instead of rolling them over at 2%, companies are now staring at borrowing costs of 6%, 7%, or even 8%. The numbers simply no longer add up. A zombie company that could barely stay alive when borrowing costs were 2% becomes instantly insolvent at 7%. We are already seeing the early stages of this unraveling in commercial real estate, where office buildings once valued in the hundreds of millions are now selling for a fraction of their former worth, simply because owners can no longer afford the higher mortgage payments. This is why the economy feels as though it's falling apart. The artificial support system that held everything together has been removed. Much of the wealth created over the past decade was not real wealth, but a valuation illusion fueled by cheap credit. As that credit disappears, asset prices are snapping back toward reality. Pension funds that poured money into commercial real estate, banks that financed zombie companies, and governments that depended on tax revenue from inflated asset values are all discovering the same thing. Their balance sheets are riddled with holes. The global economy isn't just slowing, it is going through a painful detox after the largest debt binge in modern history. And like any detox, the withdrawal is brutal. Central banks now find themselves trapped in a nightmare with no easy exit. If they cut interest rates to rescue the zombies, inflation will roar back. If they keep rates elevated to contain inflation, the zombies will collapse, pulling parts of the banking system down with them. If the end of zero interest rates was the trigger, then the real explosive charges are planted in two sectors that are now unraveling in slow motion: Chinese real estate and Western commercial office space. These two markets form the twin foundations of the global asset bubble, and they are cracking at the same time. Start with China. For 2 decades, China powered global growth, absorbing enormous amounts of steel, copper, and cement from around the world. But that expansion rested on a massive property-driven Ponzi scheme. In China, real estate is more than housing. It is the primary store of wealth for households. Roughly 70% of household wealth is locked into property. Developers such as Evergrande and Country Garden sold millions of apartments before they were even built, used that cash to buy more land, and borrowed heavily from international lenders. The system worked as long as prices kept rising. Now the bubble has burst. Millions of apartments remain unfinished. Developers are defaulting en masse, and ordinary citizens have watched their life savings disappear. This has pushed China into a balance sheet recession. When people feel poorer, they stop spending. As a result, China is now exporting deflation to the rest of the world. In a desperate bid to keep factories running, it is flooding global markets with cheap electric vehicles, solar panels, and steel, crushing prices for manufacturers in Europe and the United States. The much-hyped China reopening was an illusion. The dragon is unwell, and its illness is spreading. Now turn to the United States and Europe. Here the crisis is centered on commercial real estate, or CRE. The pandemic permanently reshaped how people work. While remote work didn't completely empty offices, it destroyed the financial logic behind the modern skyscraper. In cities like San Francisco, New York, and London, office vacancy rates have reached historic highs, but much of the damage remains hidden in accounting books. A building valued at $500 million in 2019 may be worth only $200 million today. Yet if it hasn't been sold, banks still treat the loan as healthy based on the old valuation. This is extend and pretend. But in 2025 and 2026, those loans come due. Refinancing becomes unavoidable. The bank looks at the numbers and says, your building is worth far less than what you owe. Cover the difference. Many owners simply walk away. Across the country, keys are being mailed back to lenders. This poses a direct threat to the banking system. The greatest exposure isn't at the massive, too-big-to-fail institutions like J.P. Morgan. It sits with regional banks. These small and mid-sized lenders hold the majority of commercial real estate loans. When those loans sour, these banks fail. We already saw an early warning in 2023 with the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. That was only a tremor. The real earthquake arrives when the $1.5 trillion maturity wall hits, and the contagion risk is severe. If regional banks fail, small businesses lose access to credit. Without loans, small businesses lay off workers. Unemployment rises. At the same time, Western governments are in no position to mount large bailouts. They are already running record deficits just to service the interest on their own debt. We are entering a doom loop in which banks hold government bonds and governments guarantee bank deposits. If one side collapses, the other follows. The global economy isn't unraveling because of a single shock. It is breaking down because the collateral supporting the entire financial system, real estate and government bonds, is rapidly losing its value. In this final section, we need to confront the endgame. What happens when the banking crisis turns global, and how will authorities react? They have only one meaningful tool left, and it has nothing to do with interest rates. It is control. We are going to examine the rise of central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, as the proposed solution to the crisis, a mechanism designed to trap capital inside the system and compel spending. By now, it should be clear that the global economy is caught in a pincer movement. On one side, the everything bubble is deflating as interest rates normalize, threatening to wipe out zombie companies and devastate commercial real estate. On the other side, the banking system is burdened with trillions of dollars in unrealized losses, leaving it too fragile to absorb the shock. In past crises, 2001, 2008, 2020, central banks followed a familiar script. They cut rates and printed money. They stepped in as lenders of last resort. But in 2025, that playbook is on fire. Central banks are now trapped in what economists call a trilemma. They cannot simultaneously control inflation, stabilize the banking system, and finance government deficits. If they print money to rescue banks, as they did in 2008, inflation will surge again, further eroding the middle class. If they keep rates high to crush inflation, governments will be pushed toward insolvency as interest costs explode, and real estate markets will collapse. They have exhausted their economic options. And when governments run out of economic solutions, they turn to political ones. We are transitioning from an era of market management into an era of financial repression. The endgame is not a dramatic overnight collapse. It is a slow, tightening chokehold. Authorities understand that the current level of global debt, now exceeding $315 trillion, can never be repaid in sound money. That debt must be liquidated, since outright default would destroy the system and repayment is mathematically impossible. The only remaining option is to inflate it away, while preventing you from escaping the system as it burns. This leads to the most profound monetary shift since the creation of the Federal Reserve, the introduction of central bank digital currencies. For years, CBDCs were presented as a dull technical upgrade, nothing more than a faster way to move money between accounts. That narrative is false. A digital dollar, digital euro, or digital pound is not money in the traditional sense. It is a surveillance and control mechanism disguised as currency. In today's banking system, if you lose trust in your bank, you can withdraw cash, take physical possession of your money, and remove it from the system. This act, the bank run, is how markets discipline reckless institutions. It is the ultimate check on centralized power. Under a CBDC system, cash disappears. You can no longer withdraw your money. You can only transfer it between approved digital wallets inside the government-controlled network. This grants central banks absolute authority. If economic activity slows and they want to force consumption, they can impose negative interest rates. Your money can be programmed to lose 1% of its value every month. Spend it or watch it vanish. If supply chains break and certain goods become scarce, your wallet can be coded to restrict how much you're allowed to buy. 2 pounds of beef per week, no more. This is programmable money. It converts currency from a store of value into a tool for behavioral control, and the groundwork is already being laid. Look at the aggressive push against cash in Europe and Australia, where limits are being placed on how much physical currency can be used in transactions. Look at the rise of debanking, where politicians, activists, and dissidents have their accounts shut down for reputational reasons. Under the banner of fighting money laundering and terrorism, The infrastructure for total financial control is being quietly assembled. The collapse of the old economic system provides the perfect justification to introduce the new one. When the next banking crisis arrives, likely triggered by the commercial real estate implosion we discussed, governments will not rescue banks with taxpayer bailouts. That option is politically toxic. Instead, they will bail in the system by forcing everyone onto the central bank's digital ledger. They will frame it as a safety measure, a way to protect your deposits. In reality, it is designed to lock your capital in place. This marks a fundamental shift in the psychology of wealth. For decades, the objective was return on capital. How much profit can I generate? In the new era, the focus becomes return of capital. Will I even get my money back? The smart money already understands this. Billionaires, sovereign wealth funds, and family offices are positioning accordingly. They are moving into hard assets. They are buying farmland. Bill Gates is now the largest private owner of farmland in the United States. They are accumulating gold, with central banks purchasing at record levels. And they are securing energy infrastructure. They are pulling out of the financialized world of stocks and bonds and moving into the real economy, assets that cannot be created out of thin air. They understand that when the debt bubble finally ruptures, the only things that will retain value are those with real-world usefulness and genuine scarcity. The paper wealth of the middle class, retirement accounts stuffed with overpriced tech stocks and bonds that yield less than inflation, will become the fuel burned to keep the system alive just a little longer. The global economy is going through a great reset, but not the kind conspiracy theories obsess over. This is a reset of valuations. The Western standard of living, artificially boosted for decades by cheap goods from China and cheap credit from central banks, is drifting back toward the average. In simple terms, we are becoming poor. Yet the official numbers, GDP figures, stock indexes, are being massaged to conceal that decline. The deepest casualty of this collapse is trust. Trust in banks, trust in money, and trust in the social contract itself. When that trust shatters, the economy doesn't merely slow down, it breaks apart. We are moving toward a world of parallel economies. One is the official system of CBDCs, taxes, and surveillance. The other is the gray economy of barter, gold, crypto, and off-the-books labor. The time to prepare is shrinking. The 2025 to 2026 maturity wall is the trigger. The banking crisis is the mechanism, and the digital dollar is the trap. The real question is not whether this will happen. The math says it has to. The real question is where your wealth will be when the music stops. Will it exist as a digital token the government can freeze or shut off at will? Or will it be stored in something you truly own? Now, serious moment, direct to camera. We've talked about how the system is engineered to trap your wealth and quietly inflate it away. But when governments become truly desperate, they don't always rely on inflation or digital controls. Sometimes they simply break down the door. In 1933, the United States, the so-called land of the free, faced a banking collapse eerily similar to what we see forming today. To save the system, the government decided it needed your money, specifically your gold. Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102. Overnight, owning gold coins or bullion became a felony. Americans were forced to hand over their life savings in exchange for paper currency that was immediately devalued. It was the largest act of state-sponsored theft in American history. In the next video, we're going to tell the full, uncensored story of the Great Gold Seizure. We'll expose the secret prosecutions, the legal loopholes the wealthy used to protect themselves, and the chilling legal precedent that still allows a president today to seize your gold, your Bitcoin, or even your 401k during a declared national emergency. You need to know whether what you think is safe is actually safe. Hit the like button to keep this signal alive, subscribe so you don't miss the history of the gold ban, and I'll see you in the vault. If you want more videos breaking down stories like this, make sure to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.